UK for Foreign Affairs and International. And I serve on a select committee in the House of Lords and have been active in supporting good governance, the rule of law, and the Sustainable Development Goals. I've been very supportive of the work of Parliamentarians for global action, and it's very positive that there is a specific section and a workshop within this conference on female leadership within politics for the legislative process as well as the governing process against racism, hate speech and discrimination. This is a universal challenge. It is a live issue within the UK. In Parliament yesterday, I was taking part in questions on Islamophobia, which has a disproportionate impact on women within the UK. This morning, before this session, I was taking part in a discussion with NGOs and charities working in Afghanistan, and we had a detailed discussion on the future of support for women and children within Afghanistan and the humanitarian crisis that exists, and also the role for female leadership within the Islamic world and how the UK can play a wider role in convening those who have a leadership role. So I'm very pleased to be facilitating this session with two excellent contributors in the area of women leadership, who have taken the leadership role themselves of overcoming barriers that exist for women in politics in general, but also specifically for freedom of expression, for changing legislation, for considering what the legislative remedies for hate speech and discrimination might be. And I welcome all of those who are taking part in this discussion too. So that is my introduction. I want to hand over straight away to the Honourable Kashiri Patel from from Malaysia. And before I ask the Honourable Patel to speak, we will be hearing from her and also from the Honourable Santana from Ecuador, of which then we will open up to discussions. When you are taking part in the discussion, I will ask for those who wish to contribute or to make any comments or ask questions to indicate that, and then we will be able to have a facilitated discussion, of which you'll be able to say who you are and where you're from, and also I will perhaps guide the first part of that discussion with some specific questions which have been prepared before this session. But the first contributor is Honourable Kashiri Patel, and we will be hearing specifically about the role for legislators in parliaments on effective and responsible communication and public engagement, especially in the areas of counteracting hate speech, racism and discrimination, but also the role of what legislators can do in this area. So I wonder if I could maybe hand over to the Honourable Kashiri Patel first for comments.
We cannot hear you, Mrs. Patel.
Can you try lowering, putting your volume higher, please, on your computer?
I'm afraid we still can't hear you, Honourable Patel. I wonder if the organisers would be find it acceptable maybe if we have the Honourable Esther Cuesta Santana. So Mrs. Cuesta Santana maybe is able to contribute, and then we might be able to sort out some of the technical difficulties for the audio for Honourable Patel. And when we do hear the speakers, I think if those who are needing interpretation, then there is the interpretation options which you'll be able to see within your screen. But I wonder if Honourable Esther Cuesta Santana, if you're able.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Hi. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Hello,
yes. Okay. I can go on. Well, first, thank you. Thanks to GAAMAC and to Parliamentarians for Global Action for the invitation to be in this panel. I would like to start with a very short clip that I want to share with you. So give me 1 second. I can do it now. I think we are. Okay.
Un poco de ratas que no pueden llamarse mujeres, que son corristas. O sea, para ser corrista hay que ser una mujer de los más bajos. No puede una persona decente decir que es corrista. Tiene que estar ligada a niveles de prostitución o de putería en el poder.
Vi en un chat que esa señora Aguiñaga, creo que se llama.
Esta señora Aguiñaga, solo es para minimizarla.
Nunca la he visto personalmente.
Yo tampoco.
No vi ni siquiera el video porno que circulaba. Pedí que me lo manden, nadie me lo mandó.
A ver, ya le pasó.
Nadie me lo mandó.
Recomiéndenle que se queden en el páramo. Gracias,
abogado. Bueno. Si algún militar pacta o se acerca al terrorismo, creo que merece fusilamiento.
Okay, so, you know, as we saw in these images, you know, these violent, aggressive, sexist, racist images give us a sense of what women in politics face in Ecuador. You know, it's a mixture of discrimination based on gender, ethnic identity, race, political views, reproduced in the hegemonic and social media. In the Ecuadorian political arena, the discourse of discrimination, hatred, and violence is often directed against women. So this is why I like to focus today on the political violence against women, which is part of the heteropatriarchal and structural violence historically experienced by women that is reproduced in public and private spheres. In Ecuador, 65 out of every 100 women have been victims of some sort of violence based on gender throughout their lives. A UN Women 2019 study reports that more than half of all women politicians elected in Ecuador were victims of defamation or the dissemination of false information with the objective to undermine their public image, limit and negate their existence and political rights. The American Convention on Human Rights establishes that everyone has the right to freedom of thought and expression without prior censorship. But subsequent imposition of liability is established by law to ensure respect for the rights and reputations of others. So the right of freedom of expression is not an absolute right. It can be restricted to protect children and adolescents, and all propaganda for war and any advocacy of national, racial, and religious hatred that incites violence against women against people in general, must be punished. Ecuador has signed and ratified most of the treaties of the international human rights system. Our 2008 Constitution establishes that the first duty of the state is to guarantee the enjoyment of all human rights without discrimination. And a series of laws have been reformed, and we can talk about it later of the specific laws. But what I want to say at the end is that we have advanced a lot in legislation, but we still have so many other challenges. First, I have to remind that Ecuador has a huge debt in the fight against discrimination, hate speech, racism, and discrimination. First, we need to apply the laws that exist in Ecuador. We have to strengthen our political institutions on the long term to have long-term public policies and objectives. What we have now is that a new government comes and they just erase everything, start from scratch, so we don't have long-term results of the different public policies. From Parliament, we need to approve the law to prevent and eliminate all forms of discrimination and intolerance, which is already in Parliament. And this law must incorporate the international standards developed by the universal and regional human rights system. We must strengthen women's parliamentary groups in order to increase sorority and gender solidarity and present draft bills that address inequality in intersectional ways. So we can better the situation of poor women, indigenous, rural, working class, women with special needs, LGBTI people. We need to continue demanding the government for adequate budget to prevent and combat racism, discrimination, and all forms of violence. Just to conclude, we need to work on research. We need more research, that the research come back to our communities. We need to work with grassroots organizations. We need training, more training that creates consciousness to journalists. Journalists have a huge part in the dissemination of violence. I don't want to expand too much because we're going to have a long conversation, but what I can say finally is that, well, we have legislation, we have a constitution, we signed the treaties, we need to apply, and the state has to adequate the laws according to the commitments that have acquired in international treaties on human rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Cuesta Santana. Your 5 areas, I think, have highlighted the real areas to overcome in the future, and they will, I'm sure, stimulate to more questions about them if no one else does. So thank you very much. I think, Honourable Patel, you have your audio now. We've all been working over the past year and a half trying to overcome technology, and I admire the organisers for putting this all together. But Honourable Patel, I think hopefully we might be able to hear you now. The floor will be yours.
Apologies, we're facing issues with the Honourable Kashiri Patel. Would you mind maybe taking a few questions for
Yes.
Mrs. Cuesta Santana? Thank you very much.
Of course. These technical challenges are ever present at these times. The Honourable Cuesta Santana, your 5 areas. Your first one, which I found very interesting, when you said that the key area was applying the existing laws. I wondered if you could say a little more about the specific challenges that you face and women face for the lack of the implementation of the existing legislation within Ecuador. Is this about lack of training for those within the judicial process, within the police, or is it within wider society? But I wondered if you could say a little bit more about why the laws aren't being implemented and some of the challenges that's there.
Yes, thank you. Good question. It's probably the most difficult part in Ecuador. We have different laws. For example, it's typified hate crimes. We have a law that prevents violence against women and intends to eliminate. But first, citizens need to know the laws. Women need to know the laws that protect their rights. And I think that's the first thing we need to work on. If we don't know our rights, if we don't know that something is a crime, we'll never go and present a lawsuit. We'll never go to the police. And we'll never go to present these cases in the courts. So First, we need that. We need more education in schools so people can know this. The second part is the judicial part. I think we need more training in the police and attorneys of law. We need more training in judges, because when judges come, they receive these cases, and a woman may present a case for political violence, for instance, which is typified also in our democratic code. The law specifically for elections and the exercise of public service. But if the judges receive this lawsuit, and if they follow the same patriarchal lens, they will never see, even if the case is there, they will never see that there is a violence. So Argentina has a good example of a law that obliges all public officials in all areas to have training on gender violence and violence against women. So I think we need to establish this kind of training, because another part is that the judicial system is so slow and inefficient that if you present a lawsuit, and the lawsuit may take 10, 15 years, and then you have to pay a lawyer, etc. So there's no justice at the end, and the worst part, there are no reparations at the end. So you only spend money. The judge didn't give you the sentence in your favor. So at the end, women are discouraged to present their cases in courts, and this is what we have to work on.
Thank you. I'll be very interested later to ask about how much regional coordination there are between parliaments. Learn from the experiences when you mention Argentina, for example, and whether there are regional caucuses or relationships or dialogues of sharing good practice. But I see the Honourable Patel back on the list of participants. Let's try again, Honourable Patel. Let's hope that we've got our technology working. Perhaps not. I think she's dropped off again.
I'm terribly sorry. I think there's very substantial issues with her connection, so we're trying to get her back in.
Yeah.
In the meantime, if you don't mind, Mary, carry on with questions or sharing your own experience while we try to sort this problem.
Yes, absolutely. Honourable Cuesta Santana, maybe you can address that question, but also I'm keen that for those who are now on the call, so we have an opportunity for an interactive discussion. Please indicate if you would like to make any comments from where you are from for how you're overcoming some of the barriers that the Honourable questioned, and perhaps whether you have a similar experience as far as the 5 areas for the challenges to overcome in the future. So if you are wanting to ask a question or make any comments, please indicate. I think you can raise your hand. I will hopefully then see you and ask you to turn on your camera and your audio, and you'll be able to ask a question of the Honourable Cuesta Santana. But perhaps, Honourable, the regional experience, is there much shared good practice? Do the MPs work between the groups? You mentioned the need for improving of the Women's Caucus. There is groups such as the Interparliamentary Union that I've worked with on the Handbook for Women's Caucuses. Is this on a visit that I had 2 years ago to Peru? We looked at potential handbooks for how much regional coordination within caucuses are there to look at overcoming some of the barriers?
Well, I think the regional groups, particularly through UN Women, have been very useful for us as members of parliament. Well, there are other regional spaces like Parliamentarians, the Parliament of the Andean Community, you know, more global parliamentary groups like the Interparliamentary Union. I think what I need to understand, I mean, what I need to stress here is that the fact that we may be women, all women, doesn't mean that we will all fight against discrimination, against violence against women. You know, I think we need to have a more awareness of human rights, and I don't want to make distinctions between, you know, progressive, non-progressive, right and left, etc. That may be anachronistic at some point, but I do believe that the fact that we are all women doesn't mean that we will all fight against violence against women. Yesterday in the Ecuadorian Parliament, we approved a resolution against violence against women. And it was amazing to see that women members of parliament will even justify, to some degree, the violence against women perpetrated by male members of parliament, because they put, to some degree, their parties first. So I think that's very dangerous. I think to combat racism, discrimination, and all sorts of violence, I think it has to pass political parties. And I think we need to work on that within our own political movements and political parties. The other thing is that we have to implement protocols within our political parties against sexual harassment and violence against women. We demand this from the state, we demand this from our companies where we work in, but we also need to work within our own political parties. And I think we still do not have this very clear among the women who do politics in Ecuador, and this could be dangerous.
That's very interesting. Certainly from the UK experience, what had started off being partisan challenges, there was very growing consensus between the parties and much stronger contact between the Women's Caucus within the Conservative Party and the Labour Party. My MPs in my party now are women, and there is a much greater cross-party work on ensuring that when legislation is either out of date or needs updating, or indeed new procedures are put in, especially for violence against women in conflict, to mainstream that within the British military peacekeeping operations, our development strategies, and our funding for support around the world, cross-party basis. The challenges that still exist within our media and those who weaponize political discrimination against women is still present. And I wondered if you could say a little more from your experience of how the targeting specifically and the undermining and the devaluing of women as candidates and then MPs sounded as if it was a deliberate political strategy to undermine a group. How do you overcome these? What experience do you have and your colleagues to overcome some of this? Because the video seemed the language was violent, the energy was there. How do you overcome this?
Well, the videos, the clip that I show you gives you, what you're talking about, this discourse, as a weapon, and it's usually against opponents, political opponents, and it's clearly a strategy to have women, political opponent, women to have outside of the political arena. It is a clear strategy to have us out, to silence women who are political opponents to the government. I'm part of the opposition, and it's part of democracy. The government has to understand that, we cannot think the same way in democracy. And recently, for example, my colleagues who have been putting forward all this information about Pandora Papers that involves the government, it is no coincidence that the women who are members of parliament, who are members of the commission that is in charge of the investigation of the Pandora Papers and its links to the president of Ecuador, have been victims of all sorts of insults, defamation, harassment, very, very sexist and violent discourse in social media, particularly. And precisely because of that, we approved this resolution yesterday in Parliament. So, well, this resolution is not, it's not a law. It is a political statement of the Parliament that we need to have an open democratic dialogue. It is part of the democratic practice. So what we do, we present, for example, when we have these situations that another member of parliament insults us directly, calls us prostitutes, etc., which is, which they do it as a way to insult us. I have to be clear, to humiliate us. What we need to do is to present these demands, present these cases to the parliament itself and to the courts. We need to push the justice. We need to push the justice system to apply the laws and to, again, get out of this patriarchal culture that is embedded in the functions of the state. So we need to present our cases, we need to present our lawsuits, we need to demand, and we need to continue speaking out, and we need to continue speaking to other men, to other women, to other people who have been victims of this sort of violence. And we need to continue thinking of new strategies to combat and prevent it. It's a long walk. And it will continue for generations, but this is why we are here, to change the things that are not good in society. This is what we're doing in Parliament. Thank you.
Exactly. And I commend you for the resolution. And we, in the UK, we had changed our code of conduct for our parliamentarians in both houses. We looked at our rules of procedure. MPs, of course, and peers, we have parliamentary immunity for what we say, but some had used that in the past to use discriminatory language against colleagues. That has ended now. And it may be that we look at collectively around the world in parliaments about our own code of conducts and our rules of procedures and our standards of debate. And how we use it and share some of the experience. So it's very interesting. Let's try again with the Honourable Patel. I think, Honourable Patel, your microphone might be working. Exactly, inshallah. Hello.
Hello.
I've been to Malaysia on many times, and I was thinking maybe I have to come and see you directly.
I think so. The time is right.
Wonderful. Honourable Patel, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Lord Purvis, and my colleague Esther, and everyone who has tuned in today. Thank you very much to the organizers, the PGA and my colleagues, particularly the GAAMAC for their invitation. I think this is an extremely timely topic to embark on today, given the celebration of the violence against women, preventing violence against women on the 25th of November annually. I think it is time that we speak about women who are suffering in silence, being apart from being faced with prejudices, discrimination, discriminatory practices, to also deal with racism, sexism, hate speech, bigotry, etc. I am a second-term member of Parliament, and from the first time I debated in Parliament, I had been called a schoolgirl. Some lone voice in the House said, "Who let this schoolgirl in?" And that was my first exposure to being treated as not an equal in the House. And it just went downhill from there. But then with technology, with social media, with more voices sharing their experiences of being victims of racism, sexism, bigotry, and hate speech, it gives more ammunition for members of Parliament, particularly female MPs, to bring these voices to Parliament. The Malaysian Parliament emulates the Westminster system, which means we do have standing committees in Parliament, for example, the Committee of Rights and Privileges. And this is the committee that acts as a tribunal, as a little court that reviews or listens to MPs present their case if they've been found making sexist remarks, racist remarks, particularly against a fellow MP and women MPs. But I also must share that in the past, the Malaysian Parliament's standing order did not specify an offence for using sexist remarks. It was just, unparliamentary language, or no decorum, or vulgar language. But in 2006, female MPs banded together at that time and lobbied the Speaker to include the word sexist remarks. So today you can pinpoint and particularly use this provision in the standing order to call out a fellow MP who has used a sexist remark in Parliament. But of course, an amendment on paper is not effective if it's not put into practice. To date, we have very few members of Parliament who have been called out for being sexist in Parliament to be referred to the Rights and Privileges Committee. And this is a stumbling block. I myself, in 2020, when I was debating in Parliament, an MP from the government, I was in the opposition at the time, stood up and called me dark and asked me to use face powder in Parliament because the Speaker couldn't see me from where he was sitting. And in spite of that, it was a nationwide outcry of how a female MP can be spoken to this way, reduced to her skin color, identified by her ethnicity alone in Parliament, rather than a legislator who shares the same ranks as all the other MPs in Parliament and should not be treated any different from them. I proposed an amendment to the standing order so that MPs in future who use this kind of sexist remarks will no longer be given that sort of privilege of apologizing and retracting the word that they used, because more than often these are repeat offenders and they will do it again without remorse. And I also proposed a 500 ringgit fine, a minimum 500 ringgit fine, and that's, I think, slightly maybe about £100 for MPs who have violated this provision. Of course, it has been more than 1 year. The Speaker is still sitting on it. I've not heard anything of it, even though I've been pursuing it. So these are the little toxic politics within the House, the august House, that when women out there look at this happen, they feel and they wonder if politics is for them or not, and whether do they want to pursue this if this is how female legislators are treated in the august House. Now, if we speak about the outer circle, you know, of what how women have to deal with this sort of racism, this sort of sexism and discrimination, we have found that over the past few days, there have been 2 different reports prepared by a study, online poll and research by women NGOs on how the Malaysian population in general perceived gender equality, how did they perceive gender-based violence, and how did they perceive particularly violence against women. Disappointingly, we found that many did not understand the concept of gender equality. They felt that violence against women was something that was, in inverted commas, acceptable in society. And to make matters worse, just recently, there's been a huge outcry of the treatment of the Malaysian government vis-a-vis the laws, the existing laws on awarding citizenship or conferring citizenship, automatic citizenship to children born to Malaysian mothers overseas, as opposed to children born to Malaysian fathers overseas. That's automatic citizenship, Malaysian citizenship, but mothers don't enjoy that. So thankfully, yesterday, the High Court had rejected the appeal by the government, by the Attorney General against this decision in the past, which is, I believe, 2 steps forward. But until and unless the federal constitution is amended to include the word mother, then I believe Malaysian mothers who have children born overseas will always have to be going back and forth, battling this out with the government on demanding that their children be given equal treatment if their fathers had been Malaysians as well. So all in all, Malaysia has a long way to go. I heard my colleague Esther share her opinion on what's happening in her country. But I believe that there's, with more women coming forward and speaking about it to address issues individually, racism as it is, bigotry as it is, hate speech as it is, and discrimination, particularly gender-based violence online, you have to call them out. You have to call out these kind of violations as they are. It is no longer a time where you suffer in silence and ignore. And I think that a platform like this, to be able to address this subject at this time, particularly with what is happening in the world, violations against women in Afghanistan, violations against women in Iraq and everywhere else, we stand in solidarity with them. We sympathize with them, and we admire their courage to pursue the fight for freedom, for democracy, for good governance, and for righteousness. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Patel. I'm so pleased we got the technology working for your excellent contribution there. I did Google you before the session, and I'm really pleased that you mentioned the stand that you took within the Dewan Rakyat about the discriminatory language, and I was wondering whether that had been put into practice, but it is telling that the speakership is still delaying it. So we have 15 minutes for discussion, so please either indicate, put it in the chat. But there was a question that had been put in that I'd quite like, maybe if I can put to you, Honourable Patel, first, because you mentioned the challenge on the citizenship for mothers. That was very relevant to a discussion we had in the British Parliament last week when the King of Jordan visited us, and I asked the very specific question to His Majesty about within the Middle East and the Gulf on exactly the same issue of citizenship, mothers. And I would be interested to know whether you've had discussions within other Islamic countries or those within faith leaders of what the position might be, and then the wider aspect about the role that faith leaders can have within society, Malaysian society in particular, as far as reducing discrimination against women. And perhaps I could ask the same question for Honourable Questa Santana after, about the role of faith leaders, if that is a positive or a role that can be played. But Honourable Patel, I don't know if you have any thoughts first.
Thank you very much, Lord Purvis. I think I must also mention that Malaysia is amongst the 25 countries in the world that have discriminatory practices against women as far as citizenship is concerned. And if I'm not mistaken, Jordan is one of those countries in that list. Apart from countries that are battling civil war, very lengthy political unrest, political instability, and countries, I believe, that are quite high up there on human rights violations as a whole. Unfortunately, Malaysia is categorized together with these countries in terms of this kind of discriminatory practices. I believe that the mothers who have been coming forward to share their stories and their experiences with civil society organizations, I think, and also the fact that media had not picked up their stories as much as they're doing now, means that MPs have to bring this to Parliament and speak about it. We are speaking about this issue today more than we ever had before, and in louder voices and in bigger numbers. And that has put a lot of pressure on the government, particularly the Home Minister, because this comes under the purview of the Home Minister. And I believe Home Ministers in many countries, particularly like Commonwealth countries, have a very conservative point of view when it comes to gender equality, have a very conservative point of view when it comes to, for lack of a better word, progressive ideas. That has also been the stand of the government. But in the same breath, I would also like to say that the Prime Minister has declared his campaign of a Malaysian family, or in Malay it's called Keluarga Malaysia. He has this big, happy campaign of everyone being included in this big Malaysian family. No one should be left behind, etc. And we use that to remind him that, your slogan rings hollow if you don't ensure that Malaysian mothers are accorded the same rights as Malaysian fathers when their children are born overseas. Your Malaysian family would mean nothing if you don't walk the talk when you say Malaysian family, etc. Having said that, the government also reiterated its stand that in the Federal Constitution in English, it mentioned father. But of course, when the High Court of Malaysia ruled father is read as father and mother, the Attorney General appealed against this decision. And 2 days ago, the court rejected that. So it is a small but big celebration on the part of these mothers waiting for their children to be accorded or conferred Malaysian citizenship. But I believe that when the government says that we need to amend the Federal Constitution, which needs 2/3 majority support in Parliament, that prior to that, it will be referred to the meeting of the Council of Rulers. So all the sultans in Malaysia would convene for a meeting, and I hope that the Prime Minister, if he's the one who is going to be presenting this case, or the Minister of Law, would be given the wisdom and the discernment to be able to produce this argument in favor of these mothers and in favor of the best interest of the child and in favor of justice. So the rulers will be convening in the last week of November, if I'm not mistaken. So we hope for a favorable outcome or an announcement from this meeting. And then I believe the next step would be for the government to then table a motion to amend the Federal Constitution to include the word mother. And then we would hopefully see an end to this problem. But yes, I think apart from that, in Malaysia, we still have child marriages, we still have female genital mutilation, we still have these sort of violations against girls and women. We have gender-based violence. Stalking is still not a crime yet. We have yet to table the sexual harassment bill in Parliament. And I think there's so much that we are trying to do in this period of time only because we have more women MPs today in the Malaysian Parliament than we have ever had before. And I think it must have been such an uphill task in the past for women out of 222 to have 5 women trying to speak about women's issues and move mountains. And today we have 33. So I think the pressure is there and it's growing from within the walls of the August House and outside for the government to do the right thing. And Malaysia being the newest member to be admitted into the United Nations Human Rights Council is going to be fodder for us to remind the government to do what is right, no matter how difficult. The Prime Minister made a statement to say that Malaysia would also act as a middle person between countries when it comes to human rights issues, etc. But we remind Malaysia that you have to take care of matters in your own backyard as well, or first, before you like to preach about the tenets or principles of human rights to others. And as far as the role of faith leaders are concerned, it is quite challenging as well. Islam being the religion of the Federation means that we have to reach out to religious leaders through government departments, through the Prime Minister's department, the Minister of Religious Affairs, to be able to speak about this issue, about this subject on racism, bigotry, hate speech, particularly on women, objectively, without being dragged into forced to follow cultural beliefs or norms or practices, etc. I mean, let's be reminded 100 years ago, domestic violence was acceptable. It was all right to hit your spouse. It was all right for your spouse to leave the house with a black eye. It is no longer like that anymore. It is a crime in many countries, if not all. So I think there's much room for this subject to be made a mainstream subject. But it also must come from the government. A subject like this on women being victims of racism, bigotry, hate speech, discrimination must be on the national agenda on cabinet meetings. The Prime Minister and all ministers must talk about it as much as they speak about defense and home affairs and investment and finances and GDP, etc. You also need to speak about something like this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And your leadership, your energy for this, I'm sure within the wider group of the 33 MPs now is going to be very important. So thank you very much, Honourable Patel. And perhaps after this session, we can share our contact details, because I would love to chat more about the Commonwealth and the work of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association and the UK and some of the model laws that we have on discrimination and stalking and revenge porn, use some of the more recent legislation that we put through. But just before we close, because we only have a couple of minutes left, Honourable Questa Santana, I wonder if you have any final comments, either of those points or anything else that you wish to.
Yes, thank you. Well, I agree with my colleague Kashiri in what she said about that we need more women voicing out what's going on. We need more feminization of democracy. You know, we need to promote women's participation in politics, in public discourse, to confront multidimensional violence. We also must promote parity democracy. You know, we cannot talk about a real democracy when 50% of the population is not taking part of the decisions, the main decisions of a state, of a society. In Ecuador, for example, 38% of parliament is composed of women. So if women compose, you know, nearly 51% of the Ecuadorian population, and only 38% are making decisions in parliament, and of course, we need to also think about the disparities within parliaments. No, who is presiding the committees on finance, on budget, on human rights, etc. So these are the other obstacles that we have as women in politics, and also that affects. That affects, I don't know what happened.
Yes.
That affects the decisions we take in parliament and what we demand to the government, you know, the accountability of the government in terms of budget for social services, etc. Just to give you an example, yesterday that was we received in the Committee of the Rights of Children, the Minister of Social Inclusion mentioned that only 1.5% of the how do you call that, the country's gross income, only 1%, 1.5% of the national gross income of the country is assigned to social investment. That means, you know, what can we do with only 1.5% of the total budget of the country? So these are the issues that we need to push, and I think it's important to keep hearing people, to keep hearing the other realities, our constituents, which are, violence is embedded in our societies. Violence has been normalized in our societies, even though in Ecuador, we have many laws that are beautiful laws. Many of those laws are not applied. And I think that is the main challenge that we have in Ecuador, to apply the law and to make sure judges are making sentences in application of the law, and that institutions are applying the law to eliminate discrimination and violence. Mm-hmm.
I think that was the board that was used, just which was highlighted on the screen of some of the notes that were taken. And I'm so pleased that the session was recorded, and it's been a privilege to share this hour with you both. I've learned a lot. I think that some of the areas that you highlighted, I've taken a lot of notes. It will help me in Parliament here in the UK. I would love to stay in touch with you. So thank you both very much. These are the takeaways which have now been recorded by the organisers. So thank you very much. I now have to draw the session to a close. Let's please stay in touch. But thank you both very much. And I now close this session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.